Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 46th week of A Course in Miracles. And what do I say every time? I'm so excited, y'all. I'm so excited. I'm so excited about today's session. It is going to be incredible. But first, y'all, today's Course in Miracles lesson is God is the love in which I forgive. God is the love in which I forgive. And I'm going to read a couple of paragraphs about this lesson because it's powerful. It says, God does not forgive because he has never condemned. And there must be condemnation before forgiveness is necessary. Forgiveness is the great need of this world, but that is because it is a world of illusions. Those who forgive are thus releasing themselves from illusions, while those who withhold forgiveness are binding themselves to them. As you condemn only yourself, so do you forgive only yourself. Yet, although God does not forgive, his love is nevertheless the basis of forgiveness. Fear condemns and love forgives. Forgiveness thus undoes what fear has produced, returning the mind to the awareness of God. For this reason, forgiveness can truly be called salvation. It is the means by which illusions disappear. That's a very, 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 very powerful lesson. Lesson 46. And amazingly enough, y'all, we are joined today by someone who lived the life as John, the apostle of love. So, of course, the Course in Miracles lesson coordinates with that. It's perfect synchronicity. God is the love in which I forgive. So, as you all know, we have talked at length on this channel about the truth of who we are, that we are not our bodies, and are divine sparks of light and divine sparks of God, that the soul reincarnates over and over again in order to experience that which we are. And today's guest is here to describe how he came to know one of his most impactful lifetimes he has lived and has the pleasure of remembering. John Davis was raised in a Catholic family and did not believe in reincarnation. When an intuitive reader told him that he walked with Jesus and revealed who he had been, intuitively, John felt that he had, but being Catholic, he suppressed those feelings and brushed the idea aside. But God and the universe doesn't always let things go, and the truth remains the same even if we deny it. It remains the same even if we deny it. So over the next year, and without provocation, y'all ready for this? John, there was over 10 different readers who approached John of his past lifetime as John, the apostle of love. They did not know each other, and they all told him that same information. Still defiant and not wanting this information only from psychics, John found a past life regression therapist, and we've talked about that past life regression. He was regressed, and the results were startling, y'all. John had full sensory remembrance of the life and brings forth the lessons he learned under Jeshua ben Joseph, known as Jesus. So welcome to the sharing group, John.
Well, it is an honor and a privilege to be here, and thank you so much. And yeah, I completely denied it, and I completely pushed it off. And it was a total of 19 different psychics spontaneously. I never went in for a reading. They actually stopped me and told me. To give you a real quick example, I was at a holistic fair, and I was walking along where the readers were. And the only reason I was there is because my friend sold jewelry at the event. And as I was walking by, a lady literally stopped her reading and ran out and grabbed my arm and told me. So yeah, it was a very unique experience, but I'm really glad to be here to share some of these teachings with you, because to me, that's the most important part, the teachings.
Yes, yes, exactly. That's absolutely it. So I'm going to give you an opportunity, John, to go ahead and let us know your journey, how you came to know that, and your experience of that past life regression.
Sure, sure. Okay, so before I dive into that, just very quickly, everyone know my mother was one of the most influential people in my life, as in most people's lives. But my mother had her master's degree in liturgy and was head of liturgical doctrine at our Catholic Church. So I was raised Catholic in a big way. So I came up into Catholicism. I was the altar boy. I was the guy who read the readings. I was the guy who shoveled the walks at the church every Sunday. I was that guy. And when it came to pass that I was at a party in Canada, this woman kept staring at me from across the room, and I thought it was really weird because I knew her husband, and she was staring at me and staring at me, and finally she just got up and walked over and just blurted it right out. And the weird part was I it felt right when she said it, but then I was like, that's so weird. I can't do that. So then, but as you heard the story, I eventually did go find a past life regression therapist. And what happened in that regression was startling in a lot of regards, because of the fact that when I had my experience, I'm a very science minded person. I want proof of what's happening.
Yeah.
And when this regression happened, I was having a full sensory awareness. It was as if I just interestingly enough, we synchronicities of things. Someone asked me to explain the feeling of a past life regression yesterday, and I came up with this idea that for me the past life regression was like I was there physically. I could feel the wind. I could smell the air. I could feel the wetness of the ropes and nets that were in my hand at the time, and I was literally in that moment, but yet I was still very aware of the regression itself. I was very aware, but it was as if imagine you're here now, and you have this uh, spiritual knowing or psychic knowing of the other side, the spiritual nature of the world. It was as if my consciousness had shifted, and I was in the physical world of 2,000 years ago, and my spiritual side was me under hypnosis, still talking to the regressionist. So it was like I had switched the consciousness. So here I was standing on a beach, and I literally was tying nets. I was repairing holes in nets, and I started looking around the beach. And the regressionist was great, because a really good regressionist does not lead you anywhere except for to say things like, what's the next most important thing? They don't give you any impetus to think the way they want you to think. A really good one. They just say, what's the most important thing to you? And it's next. And I was sitting there, and I was looking around the beach, and just my science mind wanting to validate things later on. I validated that on the boat on the shore, there was this big thing that stuck off the front of the boat like this. And it looked like a C-shaped hook on the front of the boat. After a lot of research later, I discovered that was used for pulling nets. You would throw the net off the side, hook this on the front, and you would pull, and the net would come beside the boat. And so it was a way of me validating something that I had no knowledge of. Um, but I was sitting there on the beach, and she said, "What's the next most important thing?" And I started seeing people running, and they were running down the beach. And I saw a crowd forming. I said, "There's a crowd." And she says, "Well, what is that?" And I said, I have no idea. So I ended up going over to this crowd. And as I got there, I pushed my way into the crowd. And suddenly in the middle of the crowd was this guy.
Wow, that's beautiful. That's
And he was dark skinned. He was sort of Middle Eastern looking. The only weird thing about him, you can't really tell from this image, is those eyes are actually blue, which I was like, that can't be. How can that be? I later on found out, if you look here also, there's reddish tint down in the hair over here. I found out from an anthropologist that red hair and blue eyes was prevalent in that region of the world at that time in history. So it was very, very interesting. But the red that I was seeing was from the sun bleaching of the hair. But when I saw him, I could feel him. I could feel his presence. I could feel him before I even talked to him. I could feel him. And I started losing my breath because I could feel the love emanating from him. It was just, it was pervasive. It was overcoming. And he looked at me, and it was the strangest thing. He looked at me as if he knew who I was. And he smiled, and he walked over and he raised his hand and he placed it upon my heart, my chest. And I had what the Hindus would call a Kundalini rising. I had all of my energies came up, and suddenly I was one with everything. And I was experiencing pure unconditional love. And if you ever heard my regression, I actually had to edit out about 7 or 8 minutes of me just moaning, because I was in this state of pure unconditional bliss. And people have asked me to describe it, and I often use the term unconditional love, but words are imperfect, and it's so much more, and so much more all-encompassing, that feeling. And I was in that for a very long time. And then she says, what's the next most important moment? And the next most important moment, which I find really fascinating, was the idea of being back in my fears and anxieties and feeling the separation from that source, feeling the separation of God. And that feeling was the next most important moment, because without that feeling, I would never know what God felt like. I would never know the pure unconditional love without having that baseline of my own fears and anxieties. And so I was back in my fears and I was feeling it. And I'm watching him walk away from me. He was literally walking away. And as he walked away, I said something that explained a lot of things to me as a Catholic, because you always hear the stories of Joshua meeting the disciples, and then they literally would just walk away from their life. They would just give up and follow him without no question, without provocation. Thank you. And so they would just leave. And suddenly I realized he showed me everything. He showed me the love of everything, the love of God. And nothing else was important at that point, except for to follow him and figure out what that was. And so John just packed up his life and left, and just started following him.
That feeling was addictive, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Instant addiction, right? Instant addiction.
Yes.
She says, the regressionist says to me, and it's a standard practice in a regression to take that person to the end of their life. Mm-hmm. It's a standard practice so that the person can come to a resolution about that past life. And she didn't realize the impact of Jeshua on John, because she said, how would you feel about seeing his death? But she didn't realize, to John, there was nothing more important than Jeshua. And so the next thing I knew, I was standing at the foot of the cross, and you hear me in my regression screaming and wailing, and I'm literally devastated. And she had to use her hypnosis to bring me up out of my emotions to get through that. And she explained to me later, that's why she took me she thought she was taking me to the death of John, but she took me to the death of Jeshua by accident. And I had this just overwhelming experience. So eventually what happened was she was able to start to ask me questions. And I started hearing a voice talking to me. And it was like this, and when I say hear a voice, I don't mean I'm hearing voices. It's like hearing thoughts form in your head that aren't your own. And I realized that I was having a conversation with somebody that I had had a conversation with before. And I was talking and talking, and I suddenly realized it was his mother. I was talking to his mother. And she literally said, because you took care of me then, I'm taking care of you now. And so I had this massive experience. But for a lot of people who have a regression, actually, not a lot of people, very few people actually who have a regression, there's a small number who the doorway is kind of left open. And for me, ended up being one of the small number. So when I will be talking to someone and someone will say something that triggers a memory from that life, I will snap into full sensory awareness of that life still today. So that my first regression was in the year 2000. I've been having spontaneous regressions since the year 2000. And what's most important to me is it doesn't matter who I was, and I don't necessarily say I fully understand what reincarnation is. Am I the only one who has these memories? I don't know. Am one of 1,000 who have these memories? I don't know. Do we all have access to these memories because we're all part of the oneness of God? I don't know. But I know this. It doesn't matter who you were. It only matters who you are. It only matters who you are in this moment, the I am moment, the God moment. And in this moment, the person you are is what is being shown to you in the image of God, which is all that you ever experience in this world, is the image of God.
Wow, that's incredible and so true. Um, that's incredible. I'm digesting everything. What I love about your story, John, is that your mother giving you the freedom, right, to explore, where a lot of people or a lot of parents feel like they have to control the journey of, their child, but there was a point where she said, you need to go and find your own way and see what resonates with you. And I love that.
You'd think with someone who was so Catholic, she almost became a nun before she ended up having 7 kids. um, but she actually, when I turned 18, in my mom's mind, I'm 18, so now I'm a man, and I don't have to take what she says as fact any longer because I'm a man. I get to make my own choices at that point. She literally pulled me aside and said, "Spirituality is a personal journey. You must each find our own truth." She says, "I hope you come back to Catholicism, but find out what you truly believe." And I spent years studying. I studied the Bhagavad Gita, the Vakanamrut, the Quran, the Bible, and the Bible in all of its various forms, the writings of Wicca, the writings of Baha'i. I just studied and studied and studied all the New Age, Wayne Dyer and the Tao Te Ching, and I just studied and studied and studied and studied, and I found great truth in all of it. But I did not find one that had all of the answers. I personally think that all of the schools of thought are just people trying to wrap answers around something that's far more simple and far more beautiful. And God is too big for one religion to encompass and too simple for one religion to understand. And so it comes back to this idea of you've got to come to that space of what is loving and live loving.
I love it. I love it. That definitely resonates with me. And that's the problem, I think, with religion, where it's like, this is right and that is wrong. And if you don't believe in this, you're going to hell. This is the only way type thing. So absolutely agree with that. So I wanted to now, everyone, John still holds a lot of the memory. He doesn't remember everything, but he still holds a lot of the memory with his lifetime with Jesus. So if you all have anything to ask John about his time with Jeshua and about that time frame, feel free to unmute and chime in. I want to go ahead.
And feel free if you want to challenge me. I have no fear. Feel free.
I love it. I love it. So I did want to say, okay, so as we get into the Q&A, there are going to be listeners who are going to say, why didn't she ask this? Loretta, why didn't y'all ask this about Jesus? But I'm thrilled to tell everyone that John answers questions from the public on his YouTube channel about Jeshua and his life with Jeshua. So if after you listen to this recording, there are still burning questions that you have, you can always visit John's YouTube and ask him a question. And this is a rich opportunity right now. He's not too busy, y'all. A lot of people, there's layers to get to them, but I found him to be very responsive to inquiries on his YouTube.
So I think that's why I'm here, is to be accessible for, and I think that's why we're all here, is to be accessible to each other.
Yes. And there's also a lot of questions that have already been answered on his YouTube. So if someone sends him an inquiry, he'll make a video answering that question. So I just wanted to let everybody know that, because I'm not into theology and history and all that kind of stuff. So which John will get into that, and he's way smarter about that kind of stuff than I am.
I'm just book learned.
I wanted to let everybody know that. So I'll open it up with a question while everyone kind of get their thoughts together about what you want to ask. John, there is a book titled Jesus, My Autobiography. It's channeled by Jesus through a woman by the name of Tina Spalding. But in the book, Jesus talks about that the church is the force that actually keeps people in fear and disconnected from their power. And in many ways, that agenda still exists today. Do you have memories of that experience of the church during that time? And do you have anything to share about that subject?
Well, memories of that, I do not. The reason being is because the church as we know it today did not happen until 300 years after Jeshua was born. Mm-hmm. The church as we know it today became formulated when the Nicene Council was called by Constantine. And what was interesting about Constantine historically is that Constantine was born and raised a pagan, a Roman pagan. He believed in all the Roman gods. And when the Nicene Council was formed, he showed up, and this is documented, he showed up at the Nicene Council dressed as the pagan sun god. And they took all of the holidays that we now follow in Christianity, and they placed them all next to pagan holidays. And the reason being was that they were able to then make it easier for pagans to convert to Christianity. But we know just by the Bible itself, if you look at what was in bloom and what was where the stars were positioned in the stories, that Jeshua was probably born in August or September. Not that I know that per se, because I wouldn't have been there, but that he was probably born in August, September. The other thing is that it's also documented that Constantine did not get baptized until his deathbed. So he lived his entire life as a pagan. But at the Nicene Council, a couple things happened. They chose which books were going to go into the eventual Bible. They took out anything that said the power was basically within you. And they made you believe that Jeshua was the Messiah, which is an old Jewish belief. And Jeshua himself did not believe in a Messiah and the only reason I know that is because I do have a memory of avoiding going to the Essene encampments because they wanted him to take the role of Messiah and lead an army against Rome. And he would not do it. And eventually what happened was John the Essene, was one of the many Johns of the time, was the first to lead an armed conflict against Rome. So Jeshua had a real understanding of all of our divinity and all of our equality. But In Constantine's time, at that Nicene Council, is when they declared him the Son of God. Before that, he was either a teacher, a prophet, or in the Jewish faith, they thought him to be a fraud. But at the Nicene Council, 300 years after he was born, is when he became the Son of God. So there's a whole bunch of historical context that people today look at the modern Bible and call the modern Bible infallible, but there's so much historical context in there that makes no sense for it to be an infallible document.
Yes, and that was another one of my questions. And I know, Mark, that you have your hand raised. Um, the different iterations of the Bible, the different
Interpretations.
and the removal of significant books. Can you talk a little bit about that? And then, Margaret, I'll go to you for your question.
Sure, sure. The earliest known translation that we have right now is called the Septuagint. It's a Greek translation. And most people don't realize this, that most people think the Bible was originally written in Aramaic. It was not. It was originally written in Greek. And the first book, the oldest book that is in the New Testament, is a letter by Paul, which is 50 years after the crucifixion. But the earliest books, the Septuagint, to give you just an example, whatever you ask in God's name is granted if you have faith. Famous line, very famous line. The Septuagint says it just like I just said it. The King James Version says that Jesus said, whatever you ask in my name is granted. So they turned the deification of Jeshua into their story. And over the course of time, Jeshua became this hierarchical figure. Instead of, he said things like, greater works than I have done, you will do. It is your faith that heals you. He referred to himself as the Son of Man, meaning he's the son of a man. He's not the son of God. He's the son of man, a human. He washed his disciples' feet to show he was no better than they. So there's all these moments that are in there that are loving and caring. And then there's all these fear-based things as well, all the judgment and hate and damnation. And the modern church has taken that to a high art form. And in the Catholic faith, of course, you're born in sin. So why would a child be born in sin? I don't know any parent in the world who first held their child up and said, "Oh, what a wretched sinner." Right? No, they felt the unconditional love for their child. That's what they felt. But they were told to believe it was a wretched sinner because of the fact that they had to be baptized into the faith. They had to get them while they were young. And then when they started to get to the point of thinking about age 12 or 13, they may then take a confession, or in the Jewish faith, their bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, right? So that you get to this space of, they have to say, yes, it's true. I do believe that. And then in the Catholic faith, you have confession. So you can do all these bad things, but there's only one place that you can go back to and get resolved of those sins and get the resolution, forgiveness for those sins. First one's free, right? So you're having all these things that are keeping you in the faith, keeping you in fear and anxiety. But if you really think about it, there's a line in the book of John that says, no fear can exist in perfect love. And God is perfect love. So if no fear can exist in perfect love, why should I be afraid? Why should I be afraid? The greatest analogy that I've heard in all my studies is actually from Sufism. They believe that God is on one side of a veil and we're on the other side of the veil, and the veil is our fear and our life is the struggle against the veil. And so, and I think what's happening in the world right now is the veil itself is getting thinner. It's becoming a more loving world. And all the people who want to argue against that are being loud right now. So it seems like we're having all kinds of struggles, but the world is predominantly loving.
I absolutely agree. And what you said on this channel, John, about them deciding later to make Jesus the Messiah and the Savior, basically the God, is what I talk about a lot, is the conditioning, right? And brainwashing us into smallness. they had to make Jesus into God, right? Only God, so that we would think, oh, okay, he's this, he's God, he's powerful, he's good, but not I. And again, what you talked about, and it's not just the Catholic religion that says you're born in sin. We talk
Right, right.
about that a lot. And imagine the smallness, the disempowerment that your child feels growing up believing that they were born in sin. It really is emotional torture, I think.
Absolutely. And the other thing is you said not just Catholicism. Do you know that? And here's one that usually twists somebody's noodle when I say this. The rapture is not in the Bible. People talk about the rapture, and the rapture, the rapture, the rapture. The rapture was invented in 1830 by Minister Darby, a Methodist minister, after hearing a dream by a Scottish boy, and then he read in the Bible the three words the words, he will gather them up. So more than three words, he will gather them up, right? And he took those words and the dream of the Scottish boy and created the concept of the rapture, the 144,000 souls that are going to be drawn up at the end times, right? And then the evangelicals grabbed a hold of that because it was a great fear marketing tool, and they still push it today. You know, the Left Behind series and all that stuff. That's just peddling fear.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, no fear can exist in perfect love is what the Bible actually says. And when you look at that perfect love, you know, that is when he touched my heart on the beach, that's what I felt. Pure love, pure, unconditional, perfect love. Now, the other thing is people forget what fear is. Fear is an emotional reaction to a future event that may or may not happen with you focused on a negative outcome. And when you break it down even further, fear is just negatively focused on certainty. But fear depends on you being negatively focused. Fear depends on you looking at the future outcome as something's going to be bad as opposed to something's good. Because if you thought it was going to be good, you wouldn't be afraid, right? So it really comes down to what you think you become. You create your world, as Buddha said. And Krishna said, you are the culmination of your thought. And the Bible says, as a man thinketh, so is he. And Shakespeare said, there's nothing good nor bad, but thinking makes it so. Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. You know, your thoughts are creating your experience, and you can create fearfully or lovingly. And that's the whole message that was taken away, is that you have the power within you to make the choice to love. And I love your message today about the forgiveness and God and forgiveness, because I look at forgiveness differently than most people. I think it's misspelled. I think forgiveness is misspelled. I think it should be FORE hyphen GIVEN. You give love first, forgiveness.
Mm.
So for me, it's like God's love, and you are forgiving. You are giving love first. And when you give that love first, you get that love in return, because that's what you're focused on. That's your thought, your words, and your deeds.
I love it. I love it. Margaret, can you unmute yourself? Greg, I know you have.
Yes.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi, Margaret. How are
Hi,
you?
John. I'm good, thank you. I'm also reading from Jesus' biography. Was Jesus married? Did he get
Yes,
married?
he was married. He was married when you know, Joshua called John Hannah bin Zebedee, but Hannah was his nickname, but it was actually pronounced Johanna. But Joshua, when Joshua met Yochanan, he was already married to Mariam, Mary Magdalene, who everyone knows as Mary Magdalene. And he actually had a little nickname for her. He called her Ishti. And when you look at the name Ishti and you go back and you look at the Aramaic meaning of Ishti, it literally means wife. But
Wow.
But the funny part about it is Ishti, the way he said it to her was like teasing. How you doing, wife? You know, they had such a fun, loving relationship. I just did a video on this
Wow.
recently. They had such a loving and fun relationship. And after the crucifixion, and another question I get a lot is, did he resurrect? He did, but it wasn't long lived. And there's a reason for that, which we can talk about it later on. But after that experience, she was never the same. Her John, Johanna left to go to Turkey to teach, and she went back to Magdala with her family, and he never saw her again after that. But they came to get her because she was pretty much debilitated after the crucifixion and the resurrection.
Wow.
Yeah. And she was a beautiful, beautiful woman. She was really short. She had long, dark, thick, curly hair. And I don't know if you've ever seen the picture on People. It was a People or Time magazine that had the picture many, many years ago of the Afghanistan girl.
Yeah.
Very famous picture. She has those yellowy green
She
eyes.
has. Yes.
Yeah. Those eyes were very similar to Mariam's.
Wow.
Yeah.
Also, in his autobiography, he mentioned that he taught women. He wanted to empower them.
I don't know whether it was he wanted to empower them as much as was he thought everyone was just equal.
Okay.
He treated everyone with no bias in any direction. He loved everyone equally. In fact, he totally believed that we are all one with God, and there is no part of God that is lesser or greater than any other part.
Yes. Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you.
Well, you are quite welcome. You are quite welcome.
Question. Thank you. That was excellent. And according to that book that you're reading, Margaret, which I love, Jesus, My Autobiography, he was in love with her, and their relationship was very unconventional. So they went against the grain, and that was another thing I wanted to ask John. Is I know a lot of times in modern days in the church, they wanted to portray Jesus as this meek man, and he's very meek in that. But from what I read, Jesus was a revolutionary.
Joshua spoke for truth, and when he spoke for truth, he didn't care who was in front of him when he said it. But everything, when he spoke truth, it was all about, how come you're not loving? Why aren't you loving? Why would you do that when that's not loving and God is love? So Joshua, people wanted him to be this. They imagine him walking in and the choir starting to sing, right? And he was a man. He had all of the struggles in life that men do and women do and people do. He was a human, but he had an awareness of his divinity. He had an awareness of his oneness with God, and he had a greater understanding. And people ask me about the resurrection all the time. I have a very distinct memory of seeing him on the cross and seeing him after the cross without injuries. So I have a very distinct memory of that. But what's really interesting to me is when I went to India and I studied in India, and I was talking to the gurus. And if you want to hear something really interesting, when you go to India, you start hearing the Hindus talk about Sri Isa, which was an Indian prophet that traveled all over. And you hear these amazing stories about Sri Isa. And then you say, well, whatever happened to Sri Isa? They say he went back to his country and was crucified. Because Sri Isa is Jeshua in the time between his childhood and when he was 30, that whole missing time in the Bible. It was him traveling and studying everywhere, studying in India, in that part of the world. And when you talk to the gurus over there, they talk about the famous story of coming to a river that's raging and needing to get across the river. And so the guru would project their consciousness to the other side of the image of the world and then manifest their body around their consciousness. That is a textbook definition of resurrection. You're focusing your consciousness to a point and manifesting the body around it. And in the Bible, there's a point where it's the story where the women come back and they see him. And what does he say? He says, don't touch me. I'm not fully back yet. He's still forming the body in that point. This modern New Age belief of manifestation being an instant gratification, it doesn't really work that way in a big way. It's like when the story of the water and the wine, I have no memory of it, but just when I read it, his mother comes and says they're out of wine. His first line is, this is not my time. So the manifestation is out of time. So what does he do next? He tells the servants to go get jugs of water and fill them with wine. So now he's got thought and he's got word and he's got a deed that's happening. And what happens is the water turns to wine. So he manifested this into experience. When you're standing in your present moment, you're standing in residual effect of all of your past beliefs. But what he was doing was he was staying in his present moment, the I am moment, and then he was choosing what the next moment was going to manifest. So he was not thinking way down the road of this giant thing appearing in his life. He was thinking about the next small thing that was happening, and he would manifest it. And that's what, for me, when I manifest something in my life, it's about using the words like receiving, creating, enjoying. I say I'm receiving. And what happens is I start to witness it coming into reality rather than me saying, boom, it's magically there. And so to me, it's fascinating, the misconceptions of Jeshua. He was a man who just understood more. And one of the greatest sages in my life was my son when he was 6 years old. He one day told me flat out, he says, Dad, God is in everything and everyone, and we control the God part inside of us.
Mm.
And then the hormones kicked in and he lost some of his wisdom. He's now 18.
Yes, they lose their mind, John.
Yes.
This is a good point to kind of break the recording. I'm gonna end the recording, but I want you guys to stay on. All of John's links is in the description box, everyone, including his website and YouTube channel, where he has over 100 videos answering questions from the public and shares the teachings of Jesus that he himself remembers. John also does personal readings and has graciously offered a discount for anyone who watches this podcast. But stick around. We're gonna have the second part of this interview with us. Love you all.